right, if you got your Bibles, turn with me to Genesis chapter 47. Seems like we have been dealing with Joseph for quite a while. Y'all probably didn't like the study. I've liked it. It's the first time that I've went through this detail before with Joseph. We'll do tonight, and probably we'll have a guest speaker Sunday, then with it being homecoming. Remember, sign up list in the back if you've not done that yet for homecoming, for the meals, or for the meal, for the items that you can bring. We won't have evening services with it being homecoming. So probably next hat. You have a special love for each of us. Thank you for that. Help us to look at your word tonight and you apply it to our lives so we can be conformed into your image. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. In Genesis chapter 47, dealing with Joseph, we saw Joseph's life. He went from one extreme to the other. Now he's on the far extreme as far as the pinnacle aspect, and things are going well. And Pharaoh meets Jacob, the dad. The family's on their way. Remember Sunday we dealt with the fact that the boys went and got daddy and said, hey, listen, Joseph's alive, and he like to fell out right there. They're doing CPR on him. Said, Daddy, you can't die now. Believe me, he's alive. He's alive. And he saw the wagons and the grain and all the food and all the supplies that was sent, and he had to realize, yes. And then on their way, as they were leaving, Pharaoh told them, listen, do not bring any of your stuff. Okay? And that is that part of the story is always overlooked. I've never really heard anybody preach that before or bring that out. A lot of times we place a lot of emphasis on stuff. Stuff, really, when it's all said and done, is just stuff, isn't it? No eternal value whatsoever. But especially in our society as Americans, because I guess we are so blessed monetarily, we put a lot of emphasis on stuff. And I've been at the graveside of many. I've been at the graveside of people that are poor, ones that are rich. They can take and spend the same amount of money after they take their final breath. They can't do nothing with it. You know what I mean? They can't take it. It's of no use. So stuff, I understand, has its place. But stuff, monetary things, shouldn't be our controlling factor. And sometimes even as Christians, we forget that. And we get caught up in the stuff aspect. And remember, they traveled for about a week, and they stopped and they prayed. And while he was praying, God knew his heart. He says, Jacob, listen, don't be afraid. I'm going to be with you. Because there's times in all of our lives when we face change, and we talked about that on Sunday. We don't like change. The older we get, the less we really like it. Because we get comfortable with everything in its little place. That is from our home life, our work life, school life, church life, everything. Everything. And I'm sure Jacob may have had some reservations, and God already knew that. And so they prayed, and as they got out closer to Joseph into Egypt, and they had that reunion. And remember Sunday night we dealt with the fact that Joseph ran up, and they just hugged, and Joseph just bawled like a baby. And what a reunion time that was. And then the boys had to go. Joseph picked some of the brothers to go and speak to Pharaoh, let them know what, hey, that we're shepherds, we're here. They had to go through the official process of the red tape to, become resident, I guess, citizens or resident aliens, ever how they wanted to classify back then. But Pharaoh allows his family to live in Goshen. And remember, he said, listen, guys, you don't have to worry about your stuff. Why? Because you're going to live off the fat of the land here. You're going to be blessed. You're going to be in the best of the best. What you have back here seems nice, but what the life that you're going to have, it's going to be far greater. Now, imagine what it would have been like if Jacob and them had decided, man, that sounds good, but we're going to stay where we're at. That would have been crazy, wouldn't it? But sometimes as Christians, we do that, though. God wants to move us in our life and do something, whether in a direction or something more spiritual or being more active or a type of ministry, and we say, we like our stuff here. And we miss out on what God has for us. Actually, after the brothers met with Pharaoh, you know what Pharaoh done? Because remember, the Egyptians really looked down on shepherds. They thought they were kind of the worst of the worst, the lowest people. After they got done meeting with Pharaoh, guess who was in charge of Pharaoh's flock and livestock? The brothers. You know? God's in work in all the details. Chapter 47, verse 29. Let's look at these 3 verses before we get into another chapter. Jacob spent 17 years in Egypt, reuniting with his son and getting to know his grandchildren. Now, I think, too, during that time, remember the boys had lied to Jacob all these years about Joseph. So they had to come clean back when they said, Dad, hey, guess he's alive. Okay? So they had to come clean. I'm sure there was some family heartfelt talks and some open conversations, if you will. But Jacob got to spend 17 years seeing Joseph and his grandchildren. And we pick up with Jacob getting older. His health is deteriorating. How many of us like getting older? How many of us like when we start falling apart as we get older? That's no fun, is it? That's no fun. You know, the reason people retire is so they can go to the doctor. Yeah. Is that about right, Ken? The reason people retire is so you can go to the doctor. See, when you worked, you didn't have all that time to go to the doctor. So when you retire, you make up for it. So as we get older, our bodies begin to deteriorate. Okay? Now, Joseph was a little older. You know, biblical days lived a little older than what we do now. But Jacob is slowing down. And he's getting to the point of death. Actually, chapters 48 and 49 give details, I guess, about the final days of Jacob's life. And I think he's, 147, 148 when he died. And but we see some requests that he makes. Verse 29, chapter 47, I'm sorry. I may have said 48, but chapter 47. Verse 29. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die. Now that's talking about Jacob. And he called his son Joseph and said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, in thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. But I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, Swear unto me. And he sware unto him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. Here's a couple of things. As you get older, it's important. And sometimes we get caught in situations we're not prepared. How many of you know people that have died as adults and they did not have a will, they did not have a living will, they did not have certain things written down legally in place. You can say what you want to the family, but if you get to the hospital and there's nothing there, then the doctors has that discretion to do what they want, and you're going to end up on the machine, you know. It's just the way it is. I've seen some families that got really put in a bind and had to make hard decisions, you know. And I know that's kind of morbid to talk about, but I hope that you guys, you know, that may be something, you know, we may want to offer as a church for some of our mature people. Maybe have somebody come in and talk about that, what we can do to make sure everything's in place. Because I promise you, it will be easier on your family. It really will. And I've been there as a pastor, I've been there as a hospice chaplain, and I've been there when it's great. There's been times when I had to go get my whistle and play referee. Because it's awful. Jacob is preparing. He knows what's coming. He knows his body's going downhill. He knows he's going to die. And I like what Warren Wiersbe said about this. He says, making your last will and testament is important. But don't neglect your last witness and testimony. Think about that. Making your last will and testament is important. Making your will, your living will. You know, how you want things divided, if you got stuff to divide, if you don't. Legalities and all those things. It's important to get all that done. But don't neglect your last witness and testimony. Jacob is a great demonstration of how God is able to work, even through the dying process. You know, that teaches me, a lot of times, and I've noticed it in churches for years, and it's not everybody, but a lot of times when we get through our senior years, we kind of think, well, you know, what can God do with me? Does God want to use me? Or, you know, we spend more time at the hospitals or the doctor's offices than we do anything. You know, we may be more homebound at times. Our life has changed. But, you know, even through all that process, I have found that, one, we learn to trust God even more. Because everything we've talked about up to this point in life, it's coming now. You know what I mean? We're looking at it square in the face. It's more than just way out there. Hopefully, we know it's going to happen, but we don't think about it. Well, you know, the older we get, the more we think about death to some degree. You know, we think about those things. And so we prepare. And a lot of times we think, well, God can't use me. God can use you wherever you're at. He really can. He may not use you in the same capacity that He used you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 5 days ago. We don't know. But let God take care of that. And here we see one of the greatest things that Jacob done was that he was a light for his family. And that's important. His final request. Joseph, whatever you do, I pray thee, at the end of verse 29, I pray thee, thy hand under thy thigh, deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. Joseph, I'm grateful for the last 17 years that we've had here. Whatever you do, please, please, don't bury me here. Y'all remember the series, was it Lonesome Dove? All right. Classic. And was it Cal and Gus? Was that the two guys?
Cal and Gus.
Who?
Cal.
Okay, well, that's close. Cal. That is close. And which one of them died?
Yes.
And his buddy had to take him all the way back. You remember that? Wasn't that crazy?
I had to pack him solid all the way.
Yeah, I had to pack him. Yeah. Well, this is kind of what Jacob is asking Joseph. Now remember, the Egyptian people, they were well known. They were actually the authority in taking care of those that had died. Their knowledge of death and, I don't know, what do you say, preparing the body. I mean, they were light years ahead of everybody else in their day and time. But what he wanted to go back and be buried basically where his family was. But also, he didn't want to be buried in a pagan land. What a testimony that is. He wanted to be buried somewhere else. And then it says, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. A couple of different versions here of what people think. Well, actually, there's probably various versions. The two big ones. We have no small kids in here. They're all gone. Okay. One school of thought is that they take the hand, place it in the goodies, the bridles. Okay. Lay it there, and that is it's kind of like symbolizing like a truce or a treaty type thing. I don't know. I tend to just take it as a thread where they lay the hand under the thigh. Now, I've actually went back today and read some Hebrew scholars, okay, that know more about this than what I could even come close to even understanding. But what I found today was still a couple of school of thoughts. One of them was it was more kind of we just call it the goodie section. The other was he would actually take the hand, lay it under the thigh, on top of the thigh, right in here. I'm just going to take it, place the hand under the thigh. What that is whenever the leg came down and it rested on top of Jacob's leg, came down and rested on top of Joseph's hand, that was a sign of humility for Joseph. That was a sign of respect of the authority of his father. And that's that's what I take out of it. It was a sign of being submissive to his father's wishes. Joseph was the second in command in Egypt. He said, Dad, listen, we ain't got time for this. They got all kinds of neat little things over here in this land that how they take care of you. I mean, it's something. But no. He was going to do exactly. And to me, it was just a sign, a symbolic sign that showing his obedience to his father's request. Now, 48 and 49, as far as the two chapters, gives us more details. Let's look in chapter 48, the first 4 verses. Have you ever been around the bedside of someone that's dying or in the process of a few weeks or it may be a month or 2 out? Do they start telling, if they're coherent, do they start telling stories? Sometimes of the past, sometimes things way in the past. Now, I've actually been at the bedside of people that they were confused as everything about the present. They had no clue about what's going on now. I mean, they were just total confusion. But they could give clear details 50 years ago. It's amazing. Clear details. But let's imagine, someone that's clear of mind and they just start reminiscing, start telling stories. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a good thing. Sometimes as Christians, especially in our culture, we're scared of the death part, the dying part. It's like we treat it with kids' gloves, and we don't want them to know they're dying, but yet they are, and that's a whole different story, or a whole different issue. But there's something about being able to come together with your family and share these things. And this is what Jacob is getting ready to do. Verse 1 says, And it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, Behold, thy father is sick. And he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And verse 2 says, And one told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat up in bed. Just kind of by this, in verse 2, we think that Jacob's deteriorating in health. He may not be able to see as good. Verse 3 says, And Jacob saith unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. Think about this and this is kind of looking ahead a little bit, But as the famine is still going on, remember they're still in the process of a famine, people in Egypt are dying. Okay? Even though they knew what was coming. Matter of fact, it got so bad that some of them had to sell themselves into slavery just so they could live. Now that's bad. But as Egypt, a lot of them were suffering, the children of Israel were multiplying. I mean, they were getting larger and larger. I mean, God was blessing. That's a whole other commercial, but just something to think about. He says in verse 4, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee. Jacob recalls the promises that God had made for him in Bethel. When we get to that point, and I don't care who you are, now I've seen some hard people before. But usually, and I've told people before when I worked with hospice, before we moved up here, I've seen God do more by accident as a chaplain than intentional as a pastor. You know why? You all ain't dying yet. And sometimes it's like pulling teeth trying to let God do something. But you put somebody on their deathbed, they are open a lot of times. More times than you could ever imagine. You couldn't imagine. They always sent me to the hard cases, and I loved them. They said, Mike, the wife, and it usually was men that was the hard ones. You want to get cussed out, get ran out? I said, that's fine. I said, I'm married, I'm used to that. You know, hey, I said, I'm pastored. That's nothing new. I said, just get me in the house, you know. And I'd go to some of the hardest of hard men, and we'd sit there for 3 hours. Maybe out of that 3 hours, 2 minutes, maybe spiritual. Break down a little bit. Come back again. A couple of hours. You know. Would you care if I had prayer with you? Yeah, go ahead, Mike. I'd have prayer with you. Over the course of time, we kept doing that. We'd talk about whatever, then we'd talk a little more spiritual. And then we'd get to about prayer. And I said, by the way, you know, Jack, is there anything, and I'm going to act like you're dying, but you're not. Jack, is there anything I could pray for you about, specifically? Wow. That takes it from being way over here to, it's nice to have somebody pray for me, but now I'm making it personal. And usually by then, they start opening up. And then I've seen some of the hardest of the hard, when it's all said and done, break down and give their hearts to Christ. Then I've seen some that was so hard, they didn't care. That was their choice. I didn't force it. It ain't going to do no good to force it. I love on them anyway. But there's something about being able to go back and share those events of how God, those encounters. You know, there's times, hopefully in all of your lives up to this point, there's like little landmarks, you know, throughout your spiritual life that, wow, I really sense God working here. Wow, I really sense God using me here. Wow, really, God got a hold of me here because I was a long way from Him. And He really drew me back to Him. And, you know, all those little markers. The concern I have is that we got a lot of people who don't have the markers. And, you know, to me, that's a very serious concern. But here we see him. He says, listen, son, let me tell you what God promised me. You know, that'd be like me if I'm on my deathbed and the kids quit coming by and poking me with sticks, you know, and they're sitting around and I'm saying, you know, Connor, Brooke, Jamie, and you know, whoever else, all the grandkids and great-grandkids and all the dogs and all that. Guys, listen. Let me tell you about a special place where I met Christ. May 14th, 1978. It's been a while. But that's when I really gave my heart to Him. Now, we didn't always live like I should. Matter of fact, when I got to be a teenager, right before I went into high school, God really began to deal with me. God really began to realize, man, I was committed to everything but Him. And I remember that night, and, you know, just like I'm telling my kids, I remember that night, just that I said, God, whatever you want me to do, I want to be obedient. And then I can tell them about this landmark. Well, you know, how Jamie and I got married and how she chased me. I mean, just relentless and begged and pleaded and please. And I gave in. And all the time, you know, just landmarks. That's something special that only someone who is a child of God can share. This is what Jacob's doing. Even in the last moments of his life, he's being a witness and reminding Joseph, hey, God's faithful, no matter what. Verse 7, and Jacob says, and for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come into Ephraim. And I buried her there in the way of Ephraim. And the same is Bethlehem. And he talked about his wife, Rachel. That was Joseph's mother. Now, I'm sure they kind of done Jacob wrong a little bit, but he had to work 14 years just to be able to marry Rachel. Men, would you work 14 years just to marry your wife? Somebody said, no, I worked 14 years trying to get rid of her. I ain't worked 14 years to get her, you know. But, you know, this is what happened. I mean, he had to work 14 years. And Rachel was very special to him. And Joseph, he knew, loved his mom. She'd been dead probably for 20 years or so, give or take. You know, people vary on the exact years. But to me, it's not as much as an exact year count, but just a time period, probably 20 years or so. And his heart was still moved by the memories of Rachel. I'm sure that as he looked up, can you imagine Jacob as he saw Joseph the first time? And then Joseph kind of stepped away and says, hey, let me introduce you to your grandsons. You ever see your grandsons and they kind of look like you or look like somebody in your family? I'm sure Jacob probably thought, oh my goodness, there's Rachel. I can see Rachel in these boys. So I'm sure it's a reminder. And it was a great reminder. Verse 16, we'll close with this. And the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Let my name be named on them. And the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And then Jacob goes and he lays his hands on the children. When he's talking about in verse 16 at the first, and the angel which redeemed me, you remember earlier in Jacob's life where he wrestled with God? Now that was several chapters before. But he wrestled with God. You know, nobody told me about that when I got saved, that there'd be times you'd wrestle with God. That you would struggle with trying to find what he wanted. Maybe it was clear to him and he made it clear to you, but you struggled with not wanting it to be clear to you. You know, there's times you struggle in your Christian life. There's times you really just, you know, you're at wit's end. But here we see this was a monumental time in Jacob's life because he was changed forever. His name was actually changed then to Israel. Okay, that's when we see Israel written now. But we know it's still Jacob. But he even walked differently after that encounter. How come, what did he have? Anybody remember? Why did he walk differently?
Knocked his hip in place.
Yeah, had a limp.
Yeah, his hip.
Mm-hmm. A constant reminder of how God is. And then we see he blesses the grandchildren. Imagine the scene. Here it is. Jacob's here in bed. Joseph is bowed. To me, I'm thinking, when you kind of read it in some other versions and read some of the history behind the Jewish people, He's bowed more with his head to the floor. And we see Jacob placing his hands on the boys. Not really sure if the boys realized the significance of what was going on at that time. But what a great time that was. And so that, you know, the question that we have to ask ourselves, why is all this important? Why do we have this portion of the story? I think it shows us some closure with Joseph. But it really lets us look into Jacob's life a little bit. Because when you're dying, those things that come up and come out of you are really what's important. You find out what your priorities are. You really do. I've heard people say, I wish I could have done it different. Mike, I wish I had more time. If I could go back, I've heard that time and time again. We all may wish we were younger. We all may wish we had second and third and 10th chances to redo it and relive it. Reality is we don't. What are we doing with our time now? What example are we setting? And you know what? Think about this. Think about Joseph's sons and how God used them. You know, our greatest desire as a parent, or as parents, Jamie and I, is not that our kids make millions and millions of money. And thought, well, that'd be nice, take care of us, you know, so we can go to the doctor. That'd be nice, but our biggest desire is that our children follow Christ and His leadership, period. All that other stuff's going to work itself out. But they have a genuine love and desire to be faithful and followers of Christ. And as parents and grandparents, as adults, we've got to pass that on to them. We've got to teach that and demonstrate that more than just by voice and directions and commands. We've got to live that before them. Now, sometimes we'd like to take them on out into eternity a little bit, wouldn't we? You know, may not want to kill them, but we'll shake them over there just enough to scare them, you know, bring them back. But we have got to demonstrate godliness. And sometimes it's hard, but we still have to do it. Tonight, with our heads bowed and our eyes closed as we close. Remember Clarence in your prayers. They've done another swallowing test today. They're going to be keeping him on into next week. Be in prayer.